Has something caught your attention and really left you wondering, was that meant for me? And then the next thought comes, and you're asking yourself, was that a sign or perhaps just a coincidence? It's certainly open for discussion. Maybe you call it intuition. Maybe it's a download from the universe. Maybe your faith tells you God is trying to get your attention. Or maybe it's simply your brain doing what brains do. They take in information, connect to our experiences, and bring something into our awareness that suddenly feels important. Maybe the more important question is, what are we going to do with it? We can ignore it, we can act on it, or we can simply notice it, pause, get curious, explore, decide. Because sometimes a word, an idea, or something someone says resonates enough to make us think, wait, why did that get my attention? That is where today's story begins. Welcome to Beyond the Glass Slipper. I'm Cindy, and I'm so glad you're here. This is a place for women who believe that some of our most meaningful years may still be ahead of us. Together, we explore what it means to redefine aging, reframe life, and embrace your next chapter, the chapter I call your encore, with conversations rooted in the importance of intention and purpose, community and connection, and mental health and cognitive wellness. Today, I'm joined by Lynn Kaufman. Lynn spent 30 years with the Michigan Department of Corrections, working in probation and parole, moving into management, and eventually concluding her career as a parole violation specialist. Retirement brought a very different chapter. Today, Lynn is a writer and an active voice on social media, where she shares openly about loss, faith, wellness, strength, and finding her way back after years of showing up for others. Her first memoir, Fire Horse Rising, is scheduled for release this fall. And interestingly, that title began with a single word Lynn was given at a time in her life when she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. In fact, she didn't particularly want it. But instead of ignoring it, she became curious. And I think that's a wonderful place for us to begin. Lynn, let's get started.
Thank you so much for having me here.
My pleasure, Lynn. I'm so glad you're here. I'm excited to have Lynn share her story. So I'm going to jump in with my first question. And we all know that loss and change can alter so much about who we are and how we move through the world. There was a point, I believe, when you realized that something along the way had stopped you, or you noticed that you had stopped putting yourself on the list of what needed attention. When did you realize this, and how did it show up for you?
Sure. I think honestly, Cindy, it wasn't just one big moment that I noticed it. It definitely happened over a span of a short period of time with a lot of loss and change. I had lost my sister. My mother was diagnosed with cancer, terminal cancer, and I decided to move back home to a hometown I had moved away from 30 years ago. And that was a major change that my husband and I did on our own. And when we moved back, there were family changes, and then my father was diagnosed with cancer. And I ultimately lost both my mother and father 23 days apart. I decided it was a good time to retire, and shortly thereafter, I started a new business, a seasonal business to keep me busy. And then my granddaughter, who was then 15, came to live with us full time. So I definitely put a lot on my plate. I definitely felt like I was taking on more than maybe I should have, but at the time I thought it was what I should do. And looking back, I definitely lost myself and hid myself in taking care of everyone else, so I didn't have to walk through what I had been through.
You wanted to care for those around you, knew the extent of the hurt that you had gone through, so you wanted to protect them from that. But in the process, as you said, you kind of lost yourself. When did you actually realize that you were losing yourself? Was it a turn of events, or was it one isolated situation?
I definitely could feel it. You touched on something so beautiful too, that, you don't want people to know maybe how bad you're hurting. I fake it till I make it, sort of. Yeah, I kept taking on more and doing a lot of things and pretending like I was okay. And when I
Yeah.
realized that maybe I wasn't okay, I wrote about it in my book, but it's a story when I lost it over homework with my granddaughter. My reaction to her forgetting her homework one day was definitely far greater than the incident itself. And I
Interesting.
remember I was just feeling very overwhelmed. I felt lonely at times, but anger became another emotion that I didn't like. I was angry at
Wow.
the circumstances. I was angry at life. And I'll never forget standing in my living room, having a screaming match with a teenager. And I'm losing. I knew I was losing. And
Wow.
I ended up walking out of the house just to take a walk. And I remember, Cindy, on that walk thinking, I don't want anger to be my only voice. And at that time, it definitely was. And I realized then that maybe it was time for some changes in my life because what I had been doing thus far, it just wasn't working.
That's interesting. I can relate to what you just said. We catch ourselves in that overreaction to something. And
Yeah.
was it supposed to happen and bring us to where we are? I mean, one doesn't know, but you had the wherewithal to say, I need to pause here and reevaluate. And that's what it
Mhm.
sounds like you did. So
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. Was that the tip off the iceberg that kind of
Yeah.
halted you or yeah, your turning point, so to speak, where you knew you
Yeah.
needed to make a change?
Yeah, because like I said, I was recognizing at that time that the anger, just being so unhappy and miserable, it made me think that I had to start looking inward more than I was outward. You don't want to feel those feelings, and I certainly didn't want to have my granddaughter see me like that. It was definitely a turning point when I realized that I didn't want that to become the only voice that she heard because having a conversation of how was your day and how are you feeling became, did you do this? Did you do that? And when she hadn't, it was easy to, I call it catapulting over mouse turds, but it's a
Oh,
real thing.
I
It
love it.
definitely, and I
My
wanted to
goodness.
stop.
Right. Yes, absolutely. In the intro, I mentioned signs. Are they signs that are sent to us? Some people believe in signs, some people don't. Some people just say it's your intuition. Some people say it's your brain, doing what your brain's supposed to, as I mentioned in the intro. But your story goes along the path, and I'd love for you to share. You had mentioned that you had attended an angel party.
Mhm.
Didn't know what that was, but what came after you introducing me to the angel party, I thought was something that was really interesting, and I'd love for you to share.
Yeah. So I have a wonderful group of friends back before my husband and I made our major move. And she would always have an angel party. And what it is you get together at the beginning of the year and you draw a word out of a basket. And the word is just meant to go with you throughout the year, to ponder, to reflect on, maybe to grow from, learn something from. And I've participated in that for several years. I've had prior words like compassionate and forgiveness. But this year, January of 2026, my word was rebirth. And of course, my first reaction was, I want a do over. I was not impressed by that word as a nearly 60-year-old woman. What on earth does rebirth have to do with me? And so as I started thinking about it, I thought I just did not draw the right word this year and forgot about it. But then shortly after, I read that this year, 2026, is what they refer to as the fire horse year, and
Mhm.
that it only happens once every 60 years. So the last was in 1966, and that was the year that I was born. And that piqued
Oh,
my interest, Cindy. I know, right? It piqued my
yes,
interest.
no, I didn't, if you shared that with me about it was the year of your birth, I
Yeah,
missed that. It makes your story even more intriguing. You get this
yeah,
word, it doesn't resonate. You have a visceral response to it that's not
yeah.
positive. You research it and you find that the last time, if I have it correct, there's the fire horse was the year that
60
you were
years
born.
ago, the year I was
You
born.
were
So that
born.
obviously, like I shared, it drew my interest. And when I read about it, there were two words that stuck out. The first was rising, and the second was rebirth. And honestly, I had chills. I could not believe that I was staring at this word, rebirth, and it was the second time I had seen it in less than a month. And, it was just a point for me at that time that I started thinking, because turning 60 is a huge deal. I started thinking maybe it was time to stop looking at so much of what had happened and look at what's ahead and think about what I wanted to do next. It could be a new beginning. My book title, Fire Horse Rising, that's when it became more than just a title for me, that it became something so much more, that it could be a new beginning.
That's so interesting. Wow. Can you, if you wouldn't mind taking us back to that night and telling us firsthand what played out in your mind and why didn't you want that word?
Well, rebirth, the word in and of itself made me think about motherhood and just what did it have to do with me at 60 years old? So when I first got it, I first thought, why is this word in the basket? So when I drew that word, I honestly cast it aside. Like, this was just not my year for a good word. And like I said, it wasn't until that I realized that this was the year of the fire horse, that word started to mean a little more. And looking up what fire horse year meant, it had many reasons why it's a fire horse year. It's a 60-year cycle. And among many of the reasons, it talked about that a fire horse year is that of a new beginning, of a rebirth, of a rising. And that is when that word to me started to make more sense. And I couldn't believe that the word that I had drawn just a month prior, that I thought had anything to do with me, suddenly became everything I was going through, everything I was looking at. And it just gave me much more of a better outlook of that word, that maybe after all, that word wasn't so bad.
Yeah. Do you feel as though that was a sign in your turning point?
I've become much more open to signs, into those moments that make you stop and wonder, wow, maybe you should pay attention. That definitely the rebirth was, for me, the very first thing that meant nothing at the beginning, but later I discovered it was everything. And so I've learned that sometimes you may not understand something when it first happens, but looking back, it makes complete sense. And I have another example, which we're going to share. It has to do with me getting my faith back too in pieces. And I feel like,
Okay, Lynn, the word rebirth, I keep coming back to that in my mind. And I know that eventually it led you to Fire Horse and ultimately to the title of your book, Fire Horse Rising. Why did you decide you wanted to write this book? Like, you left your career, you made this change, you moved back home after 30 years with your husband, and now you're writing this book. What got you there?
so I've always loved to write, Cindy, and I wrote a lot in my past, short stories. I would journal. I would write down a lot of different changes, moves that I would go through, but I never publicly shared them. And so when everything had happened and I was looking back at many of the things that I had gone through, I couldn't help but feel that many of us women, as we go through loss and change, we do lose ourselves. And maybe someone else's story might be worse than mine or not as bad as mine. I think a lot of us share the same feelings and emotions as we walk through that as women. And so I couldn't help but being tugged at the fact that maybe another woman could recognize parts of herself in my story and would resonate with it. And also writing, it did help me process many things, because I learned the difference between surviving and healing from it. So it was definitely something that, when as I wrote, helped me see things differently.
Yeah. Would you mind sharing, learning the difference between, as you mentioned, between surviving and healing?
Yeah. I think that when we go through things in our life and we are at crisis mode, many of us can get lost in the taking care of everything else but ourselves. And for me, I learned that surviving and healing was different as I related back to the incident with my granddaughter. Up until that point, I had survived everything I had gone through in, like I shared, a short amount of time. That once I reacted the way that I had with her, I wanted to begin this journey of healing, not just surviving everything that I was going through, but to come out on the other side feeling better about myself, taking the experiences I had learned and not letting it define me anymore, because I could see then that that's exactly what it was doing to me.
Yeah. You were losing your identity and
Mhm.
you were losing yourself in the process. And you also mentioned that you felt differently about other things in your life. You were at kind of a crossroads of not really sure what to feel about certain things. Would you say that that was true?
Definitely my faith, Cindy. That was one of the biggest turning points for me. I had lost my sister first. Looking back, I definitely think that my faith started to shake, and she died tragically from addiction, which is another whole
Mhm.
story in and of itself. Addiction is
Right.
so hard to walk through. And after my mother and father both died 23 days apart, it was extremely
Terrible.
difficult to take a step back and think, where was God in any of those moments? I had
Yeah.
also lost 30 days after burying both my parents, a family pet. If you're a dog lover, you get it.
Yeah.
And she passed very tragically as well at a young age due to cancer. And I was just I call it a season of drought looking at it now. I definitely felt very alone, uncertain of what was happening in my life as it related to my relationship with God and faith. I didn't like feeling that way. I didn't talk about it enough. I didn't share enough about that because I was going to church. I was leading a women's Bible study. I was
Wow.
volunteering, I was on commissions and council. How do you just blurt that out, right? And I didn't know how to do that. That was a tough period for me, and how I finally kind of came back from that was deciding one night to be honest with my ladies at my Bible study. I
Oh,
remember I leaned back and said, "I don't feel like I should be leading your study or leading this study," and was honest with where I was at and how I was feeling.
how did the ladies react to that?
They were very loving and kind, and one of the things they said to me was, "Don't worry about having your faith right now. Let us carry your faith for you." They
Oh,
had
wow.
shared seasons of drought in their history and their path, which made me feel a little more normal, that, okay, maybe something's not wrong with me, because up until that point, I felt so hypocritical. I felt like something was wrong with me. And so just saying it out loud and being able to talk about it where I was at was the beginning of I call it a crack in that heart service that I had built.
Yeah. Wow.
And I know that afterward, that allowed me to start seeing other things too a little more clearly. Like, a couple verses always seem to jump out of nowhere. Lean not into your own understanding. I'm a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of gal. So
Okay.
if I couldn't understand it, I didn't think that it was right. And I felt like God was trying to reach out to me at that time as well, that you're never going to understand it, Lynn. So quit trying to understand. And
Yeah.
that those things, all of that together started to make me feel like maybe how slowly I lost myself, I wouldn't be that quick to find myself either. And faith was the same thing. So
It
it took a
yeah.
long while.
You were patient, and it sounded like you had somewhat of a support system that
Mhm.
you initially really weren't sure if it was there, but once you opened up and became vulnerable with this group, that those women were able to support you. So that's wonderful. I'm glad that you had that,
Mhm.
and I'm sure you found it to be very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You had shared with me, and we chuckled about one of them. You talked about physical changes and that finding comfort in things like you shared about your nightly milk duds, which I thought was very interesting. And that eventually realizing that caring for yourself physically needed to become more important, but it become more important on your terms, not that all or nothing thinking. Can you share what helped you to find the comfort in the milk duds, which is great. And that's something I really want you to share with other women that we all need to be able to identify those things and do them when we need them. What helped you to begin making that shift from, oh my gosh, I lost myself to finding pleasure to help you find your way back?
The pleasure in milk duds or
Not so much what we're doing, but the fact that we give ourselves a little grace. We have a little
yeah,
compassion for ourselves. And it may not
absolutely.
be the greatest day today, but after dinner tonight, I'm going to dig into those milk duds because they make me feel good. It's my own internal hug,
Absolutely.
if you will.
Yes. So
So
big shout out to Milk Duds is just what I'm
duds.
going to say. It's a love-hate relationship I have with Milk Duds. Yeah, wow. So that I just want to paint the picture. My husband and I, when we moved from where we were living to my hometown, there was an in-between stage, I like to call it. We had to rent a cottage for 8 months, a 600 square foot cottage, and
Oh,
five
wow.
months of it was in the winter. And cottage, you couldn't
Mm.
park down by the cottage because it was a steep hill. So once we got home, pretty much we were home to stay. And moving was so much harder on me than I thought it ever would be because routines changed. There were so many other emotional changes that I just wasn't expecting to walk through at the time. And
Yeah.
so Milk Duds became one of the most comforting things that I could have had at night. My husband and I, the favorite thing that we did was sit at night and watch a good Netflix series, and I would eat a box of Milk Duds a night. I
That's
didn't care. I loved it. I knew it was
yeah,
wrong. I kept thinking, I'll get back to eating healthy again, working
right,
out. I mean,
right.
my whole routine changed moving into this small cottage. And not to mention, it was 2020. So, as the world was shutting down the last 3 months we lived there, I had already put on weight just from Milk Duds. And so,
Milk
but
duds.
like I said, I didn't care. It was the only comfort. And I don't know if I could have stopped if I even wanted to. It was something that became a passion for me. I looked forward to it
Mhm.
every night. And before I knew it, yes, of course, there's physical changes. And I'll never forget trying on clothes. And when we could go back to work, nothing fit. I felt that I had made not just emotional changes, but there were physical changes that were happening. And I had a few good friends that wanted to come and see the home once it was built. And I really wanted to cancel. I didn't want them to come and see me. The version of Lynn that they knew before I moved was nothing like the version that they were going to come and visit. And I was embarrassed. So I remember trying to tell them at the beginning, make a joke of it. Well, you may not recognize me. You know, I've put on a few pounds and they came, they visited. Nobody said anything. But when they left, I knew then that I wasn't just in a season of feeling physically unhealthy. It was everything emotionally and now physically that I was not liking where I was at. And how do you come back from that, right? I mean, it's once again, it's not one big aha moment, just like all the other things that had gone on in my past. I wasn't going to miraculously wake up one day and decide that I'm going to change everything. So the all or nothing mentality you talk about was if I didn't do it right, I always felt like I had to start over each and every time, right? And just starting
Yeah.
over is such a
Yeah.
negative connotation because it implies you failed. And,
Right.
I had already failed. I knew that. I wasn't taking care of myself because of routines. And let's face it, as we get older, we don't bounce back. Not like we used to. At least I didn't. I was not bouncing back. My new home and new routines did not help Lynn get into her clothes that she once were able to fit in. And I just remember one day thinking back to a video that I had already subscribed to working out in my basement. And I thought, I'm going to try this again. And one of the things I would say to myself is in 30 minutes, are you going to feel better or are you going to feel worse?
I
And
love that.
yeah, it really helped get me off from the couch to say, it's 10 o'clock. At 10:30, do you want to walk back up those stairs feeling better? Or do you want to sit here in another 30 minutes and feel worse? And those little things started to motivate me. We can be our best cheerleader, but we can be our worst enemy. So what I had to
Yeah.
do was train myself to know that if I only worked out 1 day or 2 days that week, it was better than what I had been for a long time. And
Yeah.
that's how I started to do that.
I think that's great. And there's so much for other women to be able to relate to because I don't think you or I are alone in that all or nothing thinking. If I can't get to the gym 5 days a week, why bother going? Oh my God, if I'm going to eat milk duds or whatever it is my go to, sometimes there are periods in our lives where we need to give ourselves grace and do what it is that makes us feel good, even though in that moment we may not be doing the best thing for our body, but ultimately I think it's part of
Mhm.
the journey, knowing when
Absolutely.
to step back and release and not hit everything so hard. You had just been through incredible losses in such a short period of time. I think is really great is that you're willing to share your story. And I'm sure you touch on a lot of these things in your book. Is
Yes, I did. The book is essentially just about how you can change over loss and profound grief, and that we can often lose ourselves in that. And like I shared, I had done that. I decided to hide in my pain by taking care of everything and everyone else but Lynn. And that's where I think other women might be able to resonate with that, how we can definitely get lost by caring for everyone. And the book is about how that happened to me, but also how I found my way back.
That's great. Well, thank you. I can't wait till it comes out personally.
Thank
I
you.
know I'm going to be reading it. And I know that you mentioned this faith has been a very important part of your life.
Mhm.
And you went through that season of drought
Mhm.
after your loss. And you mentioned that you've gotten support from the women in your Bible study group and you found some comfort in kind of pulling back the reins on needing to be that perfect person that works out. And so what other ways did you find your way back? Because I know it's an important part of your story.
Yeah. So, one of the things I want to emphasize is that often we think that we have to tackle it all at once. And for me, it was small steps of how I could get back to feeling normal again, if that's even what normal was. I had to think, when was the last time I remembered doing anything for myself? When was the last time I really laughed? I was living my life, surviving it, watching everyone else live their life, enjoying their life. And I'll never forget, I decided to take a solo trip for the afternoon. I went back to the place, the town my husband and I had moved from. We have done that. My husband and I have gone back to visit, but this time I wanted to go back on my own. And I was really happy to do that because when he goes with me, pizza always wins. And I wanted
Okay.
to go to my favorite restaurant, which was brisket nachos, which are the best. And I wanted to walk the pier again. So one afternoon, I just got on my good walking shoes, comfortable clothes. I drove to the lake shore. I walked that pier, Cindy, for a good hour. I remember tearing up, honestly, thinking of the woman that had walked that pier so many times before all of the loss, before all the change, and thinking of all that I had gone through. But it was so wonderful to walk that. It took me over an hour. Afterward, I went to my favorite restaurant. I sat and had those nachos. I ate every last bite of that. And I
Good for
drove
you.
back home. And when I got home, I felt so refreshed. I hadn't done anything like that for so long, and you would have thought I'd been gone for a weekend. I mean, it was amazing that it was 4 hours and it felt like an entire weekend that I had gotten away. So I had to start small, but just those little things that I started to do for myself, they mattered. And once again, I tie that
Yeah.
back into the all or nothing. And, you feel like you have to fix it perfectly the first time and everything has to change. No, I had for me to take the initiative to take these steps back to myself, remembering what I like to do. And it was amazing afterwards how that made me think and feel like, when was
Yeah.
the last time you spent an afternoon with friends? And I remember making plans to do that. And I spent an afternoon cleaning out a closet I'd neglected for years, just little things that started to add up, but also learning to say no to when I needed to say no. That wasn't something that was always easy to do because I was always saying yes for so long, hiding behind that pain.
Yeah. And as you started to find a little more joy in life and feel as though you were returning to the woman that you were prior to all of this loss, is that what brought the faith back in? That how did all that, I mean, I could understand because I been through some losses and I've questioned. I've really questioned, and I know we're not supposed to
Mhm,
question, I get that. But
mhm.
I have questioned, and so I'm just wondering how it through this process of small steps that got you back to
To
believing
faith.
again, believing in, yeah, back to faith.
Yeah, I think looking back that when we go through pain and loss, it's easy to question where God is. And for me, I was not seeing where God was in any of the details, Cindy. I did not. I
Right.
kept looking for some miraculous sign that God's hand was in all of the pain and the losses that I had seen. I know that when my mother and father died, I watched them take their last breath, both of them. And
Yeah.
there
Yeah.
was nothing divine that I saw. You know, you hear so many stories like people see a bright light and or they pointed towards
Yeah.
somewhere or they saw a loved one that had already passed. That wasn't my story. I didn't have that. And I remember looking so hard for a sign like the date meant something or the hour meant something or but nothing. I did not see it. And what I found, like I shared, being open with my Bible study group, that was a start of cracking a little bit of the hardness of the where is
Right.
God in the details. There were also, like I said, two verses that kept coming out to me that, lean not in your own understanding and my ways are not your ways. And I honestly believe that looking back now, that those were little things that God was trying to say. You're not going to get it. You're not meant to get it. Just believe. And, it was a process of time. And I'll never forget finding my mom's meditation book. I had read it all the
Yeah.
time, and my mom would highlight certain things. And believe it or not, there was one in there at the end of the year when I was writing on faith. And I remember reading the ends of her meditation book, and my mom had highlighted, "For my ways are not your ways." And just those little things started to add up, like maybe God was there. But one of the most remarkable things that happened, my mom's anniversary death date, I had read that meditation before, Cindy. And on
Yeah.
that date, this was just this past May, my mom and dad have been gone for 3 years. And I read the meditation book and it was not highlighted by my mom, but I actually read it and it talked about how that you are not always going to see me in the details. It's sort of like the analogy of looking through a window, a dirty window. And on the other side of that dirty window is a beautiful garden. But if all you're looking at when you're looking out the window is that dirt, you're never going to see me. You won't see the beauty on the
Yeah.
other side. And I couldn't help but feel like, once again, that when we're in it, when we're in the pain,
Amen.
we don't see it. We don't always see it. And it's not until you're on the other side that you can look back and realize God was there. I just wasn't seeing it the way he wanted me to see it. I was too busy with my own understanding, my own expectations, and my own doubt. And sadly, I
Yeah.
think that God was there. I just was missing many of the signs to give me the comfort that I needed.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you had that experience and it helped bring you back and it
Mhm.
helped fill in the different pieces, if you will, of yourself.
Mhm.
And I've got to believe that you're in a totally different space today. Would you mind sharing how you're doing now?
With faith, yes. Yes.
Well,
I
with
I do.
faith and just life, has the puzzle come back together? The puzzle of yourself, has it come back together or is it still a work in progress?
I think we'll always be a work in progress. I do. I don't think any of us arrive
Mhm.
at any juncture of our life. At least for me, I
Or
certainly haven't
arrive
arrived.
enough to feel like you're on a better trajectory. And we hopefully continue to learn and grow, and we are a work in progress, so I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. And I think that's why I enjoyed writing my book so much was because it allowed me to process so much of what had happened in my life that I hadn't processed at the time. It
right.
allowed me to identify patterns that are now pretty evident, but when I was in it, I couldn't see it.
Would you mind
Absolutely.
sharing with one of the patterns that you were able to identify?
Well, the biggest pattern was taking care of everybody but me. Yeah, I noticed when my husband and I lived where we were at, we were not close to family, and even our children had moved on. And our move back here to my hometown wasn't just closer to my mother and father, it was closer to even my children. And I loved that. I wanted to be there for them. And when I did that, it became very easy to do things for them too. We have a granddaughter who lives with us. She's lived with us since she was 15. And I also care for two of my younger grandchildren once a week. And I just engulfed myself in volunteer work through the church. And if anything needed to be done, I wanted to be there to help. And before I knew it, I could see where that pattern was. I just kept taking care of everybody but Lynn. And why I was doing that was definitely because I didn't want to have to stop and feel and acknowledge everything that I had gone through. It's easy to hide ourselves through that. And that was the biggest pattern that I saw. And then, like I shared earlier, I didn't like what it was doing to me because then when it was too much, I didn't know how to get out of it.
Interesting. You just keep going, you keep
You
digging
do.
that hole, if you will.
You do,
Yeah,
and you become lonely and you become angry and that anger turns to resentment, and I didn't
yeah.
like that.
Oh, the resentment is tough. I think that's just as tough as anger.
Yeah.
I think they're equally not good, but
And I think
yeah,
there comes a
yeah.
time you realize that you have to look at you have the part to play in that. I mean, I had gone through change
Mhm.
and loss, but a lot of the change I had gone through some F of my own making. I was to blame for a lot of that, or I was the reason for a lot of the change that was
Right.
happening in my life. And I had to take a look at that too.
Taking responsibility is just such a huge step. It ultimately helps us to heal even further once we've taken that responsibility. So,
Hmm.
yeah, you have a very interesting story, Lynn. And again, I appreciate you sharing it. So, did you ever
Hmm.
see yourself as writing a book as a younger person?
I honestly, Cindy, I did. I love to
You did.
write, like I shared before. I really did love
Yeah.
to write. And I've kept a lot of my writing materials, and because writing is helpful to process things, but it's
Oh, yeah.
also something I love to look back on to see where I had been and where I was at now. So when I decided to write this time, it was definitely because I knew that I wanted to share it this time. And I had started to write it back in January, and I didn't tell anybody. In fact, the first person I told was my husband. And I'll never forget my husband having him sit at the table, and I had to say, I've been doing something. I need to share with you what I've been doing. And he just said, okay, well, I mean, he wasn't that surprised because he knew I had written, but he just said, well, when you're done, I'd like to read it, and was very supportive about it.
That's
So,
awesome.
and the title, like I said, was exciting because, once I had decided that I wanted to write, I loved the fact that I knew what the title was going to be. I mean, I wanted it published in 2026, the rebirth year, the rising year, and the
Yes.
fire horse year. I definitely knew right away. And like I said, it was more than just a title for me. It was a meaning of life for me. And it meant a new beginning after everything that I had gone through. I was just excited to share that turning 60, which was a big deal, that to stop looking back and start looking at what's ahead of me now.
Awesome. That is so great. There may be a woman listening who has experienced loss or change, has spent years caring for everyone around her, and isn't quite sure how to begin caring for herself. What would you want her to know about taking that first small step towards finding herself?
Well, I would definitely tell her that you may not know how to fix your whole life, and that's okay. That it's definitely okay. That where we end up often is just such a huge process. And so when we are in it, to expect to get back out of it is going to be a process too. And I can only refer back to that all or nothing mentality, is not to put those unreasonable demands on ourselves, that it is going to take time, but that we can come through things by doing one small thing at a time. Changing, like for me, it was 30 minutes of exercise, or taking the afternoon trip that I took solo, spending an afternoon with friends. Definitely just small steps to carve out things that make you feel more like yourself than what you had been doing up until that point.
Right.
And to give yourself that permission. We don't give ourselves enough permission to do that, and
Wow.
it's okay.
We definitely don't give ourselves enough permission to eat a box of Milk Duds every night, and I
No,
applaud you for
which
that one. If you can leave women listening today with one piece of wisdom, what would it be?
I would want her to know that you don't have to have a big aha moment to start finding your way back to yourself.
Lynn, thank you for sharing your story with us today. And I think there is so much here for women to think about: loss and change, faith, physical strength, putting ourselves back on the list, and perhaps even paying a little more attention to those moments that make us stop and wonder. Lynn, I want to thank you so much for being here today. And I know that we touched earlier on signs in do we see signs in our life, or is it our intuition that we're feeling, or is it just a coincidence? How do you feel? I just have this feeling when you shared the name of your book and I heard your story, I feel as though your sign started at that angel party. What are your thoughts on that, Lynn?
Absolutely. I agree with you, Cindy. I've become much more open to signs and to those moments that make you stop and pay attention. And, my mom's meditation book was one of those for me. At the time, I was in so much pain that had I read it before, I don't think it would have meant what it meant to me until later when I could look at it. And so the same with rebirth. When I got the word rebirth, at first it meant absolutely nothing to me. I felt like it was a wrong word, but then other things began lining up around it, right? Like the year of the fire horse. It happened only once every 60 years. It's a cycle. We don't
Yeah.
understand everything. And what it's made me look at now is that I'm sure for me, God was always there, but I wasn't always understanding it and seeing it until I looked back, and then it started becoming more clear. So absolutely, I believe in those signs are not coincidental.
Yeah, no, I hear you. You can learn more about Lynn, follow her work, and find information about her forthcoming memoir, Fire Horse Rising, through the link included in today's show notes. If Lynn's story made you think of another woman who might need to hear her story, please share this episode with her. Remember that stories teach and connections heal. And I would love for you to continue the conversation with me. Follow Beyond the Glass Slipper on Instagram. Visit beyondtheglassslipper.com and let me know, do you believe signs have shown up in your life? And is there one you are glad you didn't ignore? Thank you for spending this time with Lynn and I today. Share generously. This is your encore. And as always, remember to stay curious.